go back and look at chapter 29, chapter 30, and chapter 31, he gave 3 sermons, so to speak, gathered all the Israelites together and gave them 3 sermons. And in those 3 sermons, he gave Israel a history lesson. He took them all the way back to the very beginning and explained to them what had happened to them and how God had been so wonderfully good to the people of Israel, and how they had over and over and over again not lived up to his expectations, and that he had forgiven them over and over and over again. And he was giving them another history lesson. And when he finished with those 3, he turned to what they call psalms instead of sermons. And I think if y'all, it's very interesting to me that his words came through in a song, because you remember way back when God first approached him at the burning bush, he said he couldn't go because he couldn't talk well, he stuttered and this sort of thing. And it made me think of the many people that in my nursing career that I've cared for that had strokes, whose stroke affected their speaking part of the brain, yet they could still sing. And it was amazing, and it made me think that Moses was finally comfortable in talking to the Israelites this last time, because he was singing a song, so to speak. And in that song, well, let's just read it and then we'll talk about it. The first 3 verses of 32 are not in our lesson, but they are words of God. And they say, "Listen, you heathens, and I will speak. Hear, you earth, the wind of my mouth. Let my teachings fall like rain, and my words descend like dew, like showers on new grass, like abundant rain on tender plants." And the rest of what we're going to read is Moses talking about what God has had to say to the Israelites. So these are Moses' words, but they're really coming straight from God. So the first part is, "For I will proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God, the rock. His work is perfect, and all his ways are just. A faithful God without deceit, yet just and upright is he. Yet his degenerate children have dealt falsely with him, a perverse and crooked generation. Do you thus repay the Lord, O foolish and senseless people? Is not he your father who created you, who made you and established you?" So, using God's words, Moses is talking to the Israelites, and again, he's reminding them of their history. He goes on in verse 10 to say, "He has sustained you in a desert land and in howling wilderness waste. He shielded him, cried for him, guarded him as the apple of his eye." Who do you think they're referring to with the him, the H-I-M?
God.
No, I think it's talking Israel.
Oh, okay.
Israel.
Children of Israel.
Yeah. And that Israel was the apple of his eye.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting that the eye in the body is one of the smallest organs, but it has such a big, big part in our lives. And it also can mirror what's going on in you. So he wanted God wanted the Israelites to be more like him. He wanted them to be more God-like. As an eagle stirs up its nest and hovers over its young, as it spreads its wings and takes them up and bears them aloft on his pinion. So he's telling Israel that God just lifted you up just like any parent would a child, and bring them to using the eagle, that they projected the eagle, always make sure that their young can fly on their own before they let them out of the nest completely. And God was working on that. Think he ever really got there? The Lord alone guided him, and there was no foreign god with him. He set him atop the heights of the land and fed him with produce from the field. He nursed him with honey from the crags, with oil from the flinty rock, curds from the herd, milk from the flock, with fats of lambs and rams, Bashan bulls and goats, together with the choicest wheat. You drank fine wine from the blood of the grapes. You were unminded of the rock that bore you. You forgot the God who gave you birth. So, and that's not the end of this particular song. He went on and on to make them understand, remind them of all the mistakes, and he recognized that he was talking to a certain generation right here that may not have committed all these mistakes, but their forefathers had, and how he's gone on to try to help them avoid repetition of these mistakes and offer them hope for the future, just like the eagle offers their baby hope when they teach them how to fly. And he also went on to try to teach them how to take it forward in their lives and to teach their children, just like we teach our kids, especially in Christian life, that we need to bring. You know, when things are really going well, it's so easy to forget the hard times and to forget to be grateful, and it's easy to stray from what we know is the reason things are well for us now. And these people particularly, they turned away from God by turning their perceived joy into materialistic things and self-congratulations, like they had something to do with it. When they first went into this land, it was already set up for them. The shelters were there. The crops were ready to be harvested that others had planted. And they occupied houses that others had built. And it was, the trick was for subsequent generations to keep up this perspective. And Moses wanted to make sure that they understood by saying, you may not care if you honor God or not, but don't you want something more for your children? Do you want them to have the kind of relationship with God that the covenant promises? Don't you expect your children to revere God? And the people could see the benefits of what he was saying, and it was a very, very strong appeal to them. But Moses warned that disaster could befall the entire company or community, especially if people began to think that their prosperity was a result of their own efforts. And I think we can learn a lesson from that today in our very own lives, that we are so quick to say, I did this, I did that. But Moses kept warning them. You lose that perspective of God providing for you and God being there for you, and all this time, it will go against everything that the covenant promises you. And he also reminded them that in the past, God can be revengeful. If you don't, God brought them out of bondage, but there's other places in the Bible where people were plagued with things because they were not doing things right. I think of the locust and the flood and all the things, the drought and not being able. I said, God always remains bound to us. And we should be humbled by his power and his might and his love, and not, we have to realize that we may come in and participate and join the church and become Christians, but God chose us. If we'd only sit back and realize that whatever brought us here in our minds was the work of the good Lord. He intended for us to be part of his children. And he wanted us, and he wanted his people to have some tangible things to recognize and be responsible for, but he also wanted them to understand what he had done for him and what the covenant meant. They were his chosen people. And they represented the concentration of God's commitment to us. It all goes back. He had a covenant with Abraham and Sarah and Jacob to make sure that the lineage was there, because he knew Jesus was coming, and he knew Jesus was going to be the leader of the Israelites, but they had to be ready, and they had to be prepared for him, and they had to be trustworthy and worth what God was laying down before them. And to me, that just translates into what we should do today. Moses set aside a certain time to discuss his history with the Israelites. And how many of us set aside a certain time to read our Bibles? I don't know if y'all noticed the devotions were almost all about Moses this week, which I thought was interesting that it coincided with what we were talking about. And do we set aside regular times to help our children understand their history and to apply it to their lives? How reading the Bible and discussing the Bible today can really help them understand what a real life could be and how we could go forward with our lives, especially now. In the world that we live in and the difference in our generations, our children don't really understand, I don't think. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to encourage and to teach and to present to them the way of life that should be by example, if nothing else. If they won't let us teach them by word, we can teach them by example. And I thought this was interesting, the way Moses put this to, have you ever heard a song that stayed in your head all day long?
Oh, yeah.
You couldn't get it out of your head.
Yeah.
I somehow think that Moses meant to do that. He meant for the Israelites to hear this song of his and to keep it in their head, not just all day, but for the rest of their lives. And Moses wrote that song hoping to do just or sung that song. I don't really know if he wrote it or not. I don't know who wrote Deuteronomy. Do you know who wrote it, Jim?
Moses, according to
Really?
my notes, said that except for the chapter on his death, of course.
Yeah.
But that was just in the introduction of my Bible that had that, so that's, I'm assuming that the scholars who wrote those notes knew what they were talking about.
Well, Moses was very concerned because he foresaw that the people of Israel would revert one more time.
I thought it was interesting too, that God didn't permit Moses to go into the promised land.
It's generally thought that Joshua headed up the writing of the latter part of this.
Well, and you know, Joshua went to the promised land first, did he not? He went ahead of them. I think they went in there with the idea that they were going to have to fight the people that were there.
Right.
But when they got there was no fighting to be done. It was all taken care of for them, and it was all ready for them. But Moses thought that the people would again begin to think of things in terms of my house, my vineyard, my crops, my doings. And he was so afraid that they would begin to think of themselves as special because of what they'd done and forget the fact that they were special because God made things for them. God picked them to be the leader of his word. So I just thought it was very interesting that that's the way things were. And even throughout our church history, believers have expressed their joys, their doubts, their fears, and their hopes in songs. We sing songs of worship every Sunday that, to me, one of the most hopeful and bright songs that we sing is In the Garden. Whoever wrote that was, you know, here I am. I'm thinking of the garden of my life, and I'm getting ready to pass through. And who do I want there with me? I come to this garden to meet my Maker, and He will be there for me, and He will sustain me, and He will take me into the promised land. So, but most of our songs do in nature point to some declaration of hope, and that God's salvation will transform and sustain if only people would remember that His steadfast commitment to us. And we should be singing about His mighty deeds, as all the while confessing our own failures to appreciate them. The basic lesson I came away with today was that forgetfulness and turning away can plague Christians today. When we forget that our salvation is a gift from God, as we draw us into His kingdom, as He draws us into His kingdom, we did not earn this citizenship. It was given to us freely. God sustains us when we recite the story of our faith and lives out His implications of our lives. And to me, that was the basis of this lesson. Anybody have anything else they want to add or contribute?
You mentioned Moses couldn't go on, we know why that happened. I believe it was at Meribah, but it wasn't somewhere else. The people were needing water, and God had told Moses in the past to go out and strike a rock with a
Right.
stick, and water would come. Well, Moses got really angry, and he ran out and struck the rock all by himself without waiting to ask God. Well, God gave them the water because they needed the water, but he later told Moses, listen, you're trying to play my God, to be like me. You're making yourself. He says, you're not going to go to the promised land. You just blew that.
Seems like I do remember hearing that story. now.
But he did later say you could see it, so when
Yeah.
he died, he went up on the mountains and could see it.
Yeah. Must have been,
I think the place is called Meribah, which means waters of strife.
how sad it must have been for Moses not to be able to go after being
600
with him
years.
all those years and trying so hard to keep them on the path that they were supposed to go.
And seeing God face to face.
Yes, that must have been the most rewarding thing of all.
He was 120 years old when he died.
Yeah,
But it said that he was still physically,
Yes, but his eye was not dimmed,
yeah,
nor his vigor abated.
I know. So, and still, yeah, absolutely. And then yet.
isn't that what we all want for our aging years? I know I do. I want to be able to
Keep going.
keep going, and both physically and mentally.
I think the part that bothers me though about here, it talks about talking to our children. And I think that perhaps we have, but what about people who are just not particularly active Christians?
What's going to happen for their children?
According to the Census Bureau, we have now reached the point where barely more than half the people in the United States claim to be. I think it's 62%. It used to be 95%. I think it's gotten down to 62%. And it's predictable if the decline continues, that
Well, I think part of it
in the
is
next 20 years or so, it'll reach.
the difference in the makeup of the people of our world today. And in the United States, I mean, we didn't have the Muslims and that.
But it's not that. We have Christians who are unchurched and.
I know that.
Just-
I was talking about the percentages.
And
Yeah,
the
okay.
thing about it is, there's so much evangelism which is aimed the wrong way. You know, too many people come out and want you to turn to God because you're going to go, they're saying you're going to be punished if you don't. Well, God doesn't say that. God says, if you will come to me, I will ease your burden. He didn't say, if you don't come to me, I will increase your burden. What he's saying is, we all have burdens and I can help you. And too many of the evangelists that I hear are not preaching that. Billy Graham was very good for preaching that one of the things that he was constantly saying is that God will ease your burdens, not make them more. But listen to some of the more shouty ones.
Oh, I grew up in a kind of environment.
Well, I think also.
I wasn't, a pulpit pumper.
It's fear making you.
Yeah.
And that's,
If you
Yeah.
don't do this, this is exactly what's gonna happen. Well, we know that, but that wasn't the way God felt about it, or even Jesus taught about it.
Right.
And
And,
Well,
and if you look at what it says in the Bible, I have to come to the conclusion that that if the dead go into the lakes of fire, it's going to be because they dug them themselves and filled them with fire themselves. I don't think God will do it to them. I think they'll do it to themselves. It's like the famous story that in heaven everybody is at a gigantic banquet that after you die, everyone goes to a gigantic banquet. And you're given bowls of delicious food. But you're given spoons this long. All right, so what will happen?
You
The
have to
Christians
feed
will
each
feed
other.
each other.
Yeah,
And the people who do not have that love in their heart will starve. Will sit there and look at the food and won't dare. And, you know, I always thought that was a wonderful picture. It's nothing, it's not in the Bible, but it's a great picture.
Yes.
well, let's look on page 32 and say our closing prayer together, please. Merciful God, we thank you for your steadfast love throughout the ages. We know too well the times we have forgotten that you alone are the source of our many blessings. Renew a right heart within us, we pray, and help our thankfulness to shape all that we say and do. Amen. Well, thank you.
Good lesson.
Huh?
Good.